Imagine you're sitting in a cafe, enjoying your coffee and minding your own business, when someone sits down at the table next to you and strikes up what seems like an innocent conversation. Maybe they comment on the book you're reading, or ask about your laptop sticker, or mention they're visiting from out of town and need a restaurant recommendation. The conversation flows naturally, easily, almost effortlessly. You find yourself laughing at their jokes, nodding along with their observations, and before you know it, you're sharing personal details about your job, your frustrations with your boss, your recent divorce, things you normally wouldn't tell a stranger. 5 minutes ago, this person was a complete unknown, and now you feel like you've known them for years. You exchange numbers, maybe even agree to meet up again. You walk away feeling good about the interaction, like you've made a genuine connection with someone who really understands you. But here's what you don't realize. What you can't possibly know in that moment, you've just been expertly manipulated by a trained intelligence operative who has spent years mastering the psychological techniques of rapid trust building. This isn't science fiction or paranoid fantasy. This is exactly how intelligence agencies around the world, from the CIA to Mossad, from MI6 to Russia's FSB, trained their operatives to build instant rapport and extract information from targets. These techniques are so refined, so psychologically powerful, and so deeply rooted in human neuroscience that they work on almost everyone, regardless of how smart, suspicious, or careful you think you are. The scary part is that these methods don't require days or weeks of careful cultivation. A skilled operative can establish trust, create emotional connection, and begin extracting valuable intelligence in under 5 minutes, sometimes in less than 2. They understand human psychology at a level that most of us never consider, exploiting cognitive biases, emotional needs, and social instincts that are hardwired into our brains from millions of years of evolution. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on these techniques, revealing exactly how spies gain trust so quickly, what psychological principles they're exploiting, and most importantly, how you can recognize when someone is using these methods on you. Whether you're fascinated by espionage, tradecraft, or simply want to protect yourself from manipulation in everyday life, understanding these techniques will change how you view every conversation you have with strangers. By the end of this video, you'll never look at casual conversations the same way again, and you'll have the tools to spot manipulation before you become a target. Before we dive into the specific techniques that spies use to build rapid trust, we need to understand the psychological and neurological foundation that makes these methods so devastatingly effective. Trust isn't some mystical, magical quality that either exists or doesn't. It's a biological and psychological response that can be triggered, manipulated, and manufactured through specific behaviors and techniques. The human brain is evolutionarily wired to make snap judgments about other people within the first few seconds of meeting them, a survival mechanism that helped our ancestors quickly determine whether a stranger was friend or foe, safe or dangerous. Research in social psychology shows that we form impressions of trustworthiness within just 7 seconds of meeting someone, based primarily on nonverbal cues like facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, and eye contact. These initial impressions are incredibly powerful and difficult to change once formed, which is why first impressions matter so much and why spies invest enormous effort into controlling every aspect of those critical first moments. At the neurological level, trust is mediated by several brain systems and chemical processes that spies have learned to trigger artificially. Oxytocin, often called the trust hormone or bonding hormone, is released in the brain during positive social interactions, physical touch, and emotional connection. When oxytocin levels increase, we feel more trusting, more willing to share personal information, and less suspicious of others' motives. Intelligence operatives are trained to trigger oxytocin release through specific behaviors, like warm eye contact, appropriate touch such as a handshake, or brief shoulder touch, active listening. That makes the target feel valued and creating moments of shared laughter or emotional resonance. The beauty of this system, from a spy's perspective, is that oxytocin release creates a positive feedback loop where trust generates more trust, making each subsequent interaction easier and more productive. Beyond brain chemistry, spies exploit well-documented cognitive biases that affect how we perceive and judge others. The halo effect causes us to assume that people who are attractive, well-dressed, or initially likable possess other positive qualities like honesty and trustworthiness, even without evidence. The reciprocity principle, deeply embedded in human social behavior across all cultures, creates a powerful psychological pressure to return favors, match self-disclosure, and reciprocate trust when someone extends it to us first. The similarity attraction bias makes us automatically trust people who seem similar to us in background, beliefs, interests, or mannerisms. A tribal instinct from our evolutionary past. Intelligence agencies have studied these biases extensively, developing training programs that teach operatives exactly how to present themselves and structure interactions to trigger these automatic, unconscious responses that bypass our rational defenses and critical thinking. The first and perhaps most fundamental technique that spies use to build instant rapport is called mirroring and matching, a subtle form of behavioral mimicry that operates almost entirely below the level of conscious awareness for both the operative and the target. This technique involves carefully observing and then subtly copying another person's body language, gestures, speech patterns, energy levels, and even breathing rhythms to create a subconscious sense of connection and familiarity. When done correctly, mirroring is completely invisible to the target, who simply experiences a vague but powerful feeling that they like this person, that the conversation feels natural and comfortable without understanding why. The psychological mechanism behind mirroring is rooted in the discovery of mirror neurons in the brain, specialized cells that fire both when we perform an action and when we observe someone else performing the same action. These neurons create an automatic tendency to mimic the people around us, and when someone mirrors us back, it creates a neurological resonance that the brain interprets as connection, similarity, and trustworthiness. In practical application, a trained operative will begin mirroring within the first 30 seconds of an interaction, starting with the most basic and least noticeable elements. If the target is sitting with their legs crossed, the operative crosses their legs in the same direction, after a brief delay of 10 to 15 seconds to avoid obvious copying. If the target leans forward during conversation, the operative leans forward moments later. If the target speaks quickly with animated hand gestures, the operative gradually increases their own speaking pace and incorporates similar gestures. If the target speaks slowly and thoughtfully with minimal movement, the operative matches that calm, measured energy. The key to effective mirroring is subtlety and delayed response. Never copying immediately or exactly, but creating an overall impression of similarity and synchronization. Advanced operatives even mirror breathing patterns by watching the rise and fall of the target as shoulders or chest, then adjusting their own breathing to match, creating a physiological synchronization that produces unusually deep rapport. Vocal mirroring is equally important and involves matching not just what someone says but how they say it. This includes matching their speaking pace, whether fast and energetic or slow, and deliberate their volume level from soft-spoken to loud and enthusiastic, their tone and pitch within your natural range, and even their choice of words and phrases. If a target uses specific jargon, slang, or expressions, the operative will incorporate those same terms naturally into their own speech. If the target speaks in short, direct sentences, the operative does the same rather than using long, complex constructions. This linguistic mirroring creates a powerful sense that both people speak the same language in a deeper sense than just vocabulary, suggesting shared background, education level, or social group. The cumulative effect of physical and vocal mirroring is that within just 2 to 3 minutes, the target's brain has registered dozens of similarities, triggering the similarity attraction bias and creating a foundation of trust that feels completely organic and natural rather than manufactured and manipulative. The second critical technique in a spy's rapid trust-building arsenal is active listening, combined with strategic validation, a skill that goes far beyond simply hearing words and involves making the target feel truly seen, understood, and valued in ways they rarely experience in normal social interactions. Most people are terrible listeners, constantly interrupting, waiting for their turn to talk, checking their phones, or mentally preparing their next comment rather than genuinely focusing on what the other person is saying. Spies exploit this common deficit by being extraordinarily attentive listeners, creating such a stark contrast with typical conversations that targets often describe the experience as magnetic, saying things like "I felt like I was the only person in the room," or "they really got me in ways that nobody else does." This perception of being deeply understood creates powerful emotional bonds remarkably quickly, because humans have a fundamental need to be heard and validated that is chronically unfulfilled in modern society. The mechanics of active listening, as practiced by intelligence operatives, involve several specific behaviors that work together to create this effect. First, maintaining consistent but natural eye contact, typically holding the target's gaze for 4 to 5 seconds before briefly looking away, then returning, creates a sense of focus and intensity without becoming uncomfortable or aggressive. Second, using verbal affirmations and encouragement like "I see," "that makes sense," "tell me more," or really subtly reinforces that the target should continue sharing and that their thoughts are valuable and interesting. Third, employing strategic paraphrasing, where the operative occasionally restates what the target has said in slightly different words, demonstrating that they're not just hearing but actually processing and understanding. For example, if a target says, "I'm frustrated because my boss never recognizes my contributions," the operative might respond with, "So you feel like your hard work goes unnoticed and unappreciated," which validates the emotion while encouraging elaboration. Perhaps the most powerful element of this technique is validation without judgment, where the operative accepts and affirms whatever the target shares, even if it's controversial, politically incorrect, or morally questionable. This doesn't mean agreeing with everything, but rather communicating acceptance and understanding of the target's perspective and feelings. If a target expresses an unpopular opinion or admits to something they're ashamed of, the operative responds with empathy rather than criticism, saying things like, "I can understand why you feel that way," or "that must have been really difficult for you." This non-judgmental acceptance creates psychological safety, a sense that this person won't criticize, mock, or reject them, which dramatically lowers defenses and increases willingness to share sensitive information. The operative also demonstrates retention of details by referencing something the target mentioned earlier in the conversation, proving they were truly listening and that the target's words matter enough to remember. Within just a few minutes of this kind of focused, validating attention, targets often share things they've never told anyone else, simply because they finally feel safe enough and valued enough to open up completely. The third powerful technique in a spy's rapid trust-building arsenal is strategic vulnerability, the calculated art of sharing personal information or appearing emotionally open in ways that trigger the reciprocity principle and create a false sense of mutual intimacy. This technique is counterintuitive because most people assume spies would be secretive and guarded, never revealing anything personal. In reality, skilled operatives understand that vulnerability is one of the fastest paths to trust, and they've mastered the ability to share information that seems deeply personal, while actually revealing nothing that could compromise their mission or true identity. The psychology behind this is powerful and well documented. When someone shares something private or sensitive with us, we feel honored, special, and psychologically compelled to reciprocate by sharing something equally personal in return. This creates what psychologists call the disclosure reciprocity effect, where self-disclosure from one person triggers self-disclosure from another in an escalating cycle. Spies weaponize this natural human tendency by being the first to share, controlling the direction and depth of the exchange while appearing to be the vulnerable party. In practice, Strategic vulnerability might involve an operative sharing a carefully constructed story about a personal struggle, a professional setback, a family conflict, or an emotional challenge that makes them seem relatable and human. The key is that the story must feel authentic and emotionally resonant, containing enough specific details to seem real but carefully designed to be impossible to verify, and containing no information that could expose the operative as true identity or mission. For example, an operative might share a story about struggling with the pressure of living up to a successful parent as expectations, feeling undervalued at work despite working hard, going through a difficult breakup that taught them about themselves, or dealing with the stress of caring for an aging parent. These stories work because they tap into universal human experiences that almost anyone can relate to, creating instant emotional connection and the feeling that this person understands what you're going through because they've been there too. The timing and delivery of strategic vulnerability is crucial to its effectiveness. Operatives are trained to introduce vulnerability gradually, not dumping heavy emotional content in the first minute, which would seem strange and manipulative, but rather letting it emerge naturally. In conversation, after some initial rapport has been established, they might start with something small and relatively safe, then gradually increase the intimacy level as the target responds positively and begins sharing in return. The operative also pays careful attention to matching the level of vulnerability, never sharing significantly more or less than the target, which would disrupt the balance and feel unnatural. They also use nonverbal cues to sell the authenticity of their disclosure, perhaps looking away briefly as if the topic is difficult, showing a flash of emotion in their facial expression, or pausing as if gathering courage to continue. Within just a few minutes of skillful strategic vulnerability, the target feels they've made a genuine connection with someone who truly understands them, never realizing that every word, pause, and emotion was carefully calculated to manipulate them into lowering their guard and sharing information they would normally keep private. The fourth essential technique that spies use to accelerate trust is finding and emphasizing common ground. The deliberate identification and highlighting of shared experiences, beliefs, backgrounds, or interests that create a powerful sense of similarity and connection. This technique exploits one of the most fundamental principles of human psychology, the similarity attraction bias, which causes us to automatically like and trust people who seem similar to us more than those who appear different. From an evolutionary perspective, this bias made sense because people from our own tribe, who shared our language, customs, and values, were statistically more likely to be allies than threats. Modern intelligence operatives exploit this ancient instinct by manufacturing similarities that make targets feel an instant kinship, as if they've found someone who truly gets them because they share the same background, struggles, or worldview. The beauty of this technique is that it works at both conscious and unconscious levels, creating trust through obvious commonalities while also triggering deeper psychological responses that bypass critical thinking. The most sophisticated application of finding common ground begins long before the actual interaction, with extensive research and preparation about the target. Intelligence agencies invest enormous resources in building detailed profiles of targets, gathering information about their education, hometown, hobbies, political beliefs, favorite books or movies, professional background, family situation, and any other details that might provide connection points. This information comes from social media profiles, public records, surveillance, information from other sources, and any available intelligence reports. Armed with this knowledge, the operative can engineer seemingly coincidental discoveries of shared experiences during conversation. For example, if the operative knows the target grew up in a specific city, attended a particular university, or worked in a certain industry, they can casually mention their own connection to the same place or experience, triggering an excited response of "Really? Me too. What are the odds?" These manufactured coincidences feel magical and meaningful to the target, creating an immediate sense that this meeting was somehow meant to happen, when in reality every similarity was carefully researched and planned. Beyond demographic similarities, skilled operatives also create common ground through opinions, values, and perspectives, essentially becoming a mirror that reflects back whatever the target wants to see. If the target expresses frustration with government bureaucracy, the operative shares similar frustrations. If the target mentions loving a particular author, the operative happens to be a fan as well. If the target reveals political views, the operative expresses sympathetic or identical positions. This doesn't mean operatives agree with absolutely everything, which would seem suspicious and inauthentic, but rather that they emphasize areas of agreement while downplaying or diplomatically navigating areas of disagreement. The operative might occasionally express a slightly different perspective on minor issues to maintain credibility, but on the topics that matter most to the target, the topics tied to their identity and values, the operative finds ways to align and validate. They also adopt similar communication styles, using the same kind of humor, the same level of formality or casualness, and the same types of expressions or phrases the target uses. If the target speaks in concrete, practical terms, the operative does the same rather than using abstract or theoretical language. If the target frequently uses sports metaphors or references pop culture, the operative mirrors the pattern. The cumulative effect of all these similarities, both substantive and stylistic, is that within minutes the target's brain has registered dozens of connection points, creating a powerful unconscious conclusion that this person is like me and therefore trustworthy, safe, and worthy of openness and honesty. The fifth and perhaps most sophisticated technique in a spy's toolkit is elicitation, the art of extracting information without asking direct questions that might raise suspicion or trigger defensive responses. Unlike interrogation, where questions are explicit and the power dynamic is obvious, elicitation feels like natural conversation where the target believes they're volunteering information freely, often thinking they're the ones guiding the discussion. This technique is so effective that targets frequently don't realize they've revealed sensitive information until much later, if ever. And intelligence agencies consider it one of the most valuable skills an operative can master. The fundamental principle behind elicitation is that people love to talk about themselves, correct others when they're wrong, demonstrate their expertise and knowledge, and feel important or valued for what they know. Spies exploit these natural human tendencies by creating conversational situations where the target feels compelled to share information without being directly asked, believing they're simply being helpful, showing off their knowledge, or engaging in normal social interaction. One of the most effective elicitation techniques is the deliberate mistake, where the operative makes an incorrect statement about something the target knows well, triggering an almost irresistible urge to correct the error. For example, if an operative wants to know about security procedures at a target's workplace, they might say something like, "I heard your company uses pretty basic security. Just badge readers at the door, right?" The target, wanting to correct this misconception and perhaps feeling a bit of pride in their organization, will often respond with detailed corrections like, "Actually, we have much more than that. We have biometric scanners, security cameras everywhere, random bag checks, and you need supervisor approval to access certain floors." Within seconds, the operative has gathered detailed intelligence about security protocols without asking a single direct question. The beauty of this technique is that the target feels smart and helpful for correcting the mistake, never realizing they have been manipulated into revealing sensitive information. Another powerful elicitation method is flattering curiosity, where the operative expresses genuine seeming interest in the target's work, expertise, or experiences in ways that make the target feel valued and important. Most people's work lives are underappreciated and their expertise goes unrecognized. So when someone shows authentic interest, it triggers a desire to explain, share, and demonstrate knowledge. An operative might say something like, "Your job sounds fascinating. I've always wondered how that actually works. or that must require incredible skill. How did you learn to do that? These prompts feel like compliments and natural conversation rather than intelligence gathering, causing targets to enthusiastically explain processes, reveal organizational structures, mention names of colleagues and supervisors, and share details about projects and timelines. The operative guides the conversation with follow-up prompts like, "That's amazing. What happened next?" Or "How does your team handle that situation?" Keeping the target talking while extracting layers of information. A skilled operative can learn an extraordinary amount about an organization, its people, its processes, and its vulnerabilities through 30 minutes of conversation that feels to the target like a pleasant chat with someone who finally appreciates what they do. To truly understand how these techniques work in practice, let us examine real-world examples and case studies where spies have successfully used rapid trust building to accomplish intelligence objectives. One of the most famous cases involves Robert Hansen, the FBI agent who became one of the most damaging spies in American history. Hansen was exceptionally skilled at building trust quickly with both his FBI colleagues and his Soviet handlers, using many of the techniques we've discussed. He employed mirroring and active listening to make people feel comfortable around him, used strategic vulnerability by sharing carefully calculated personal information that made him seem trustworthy and relatable, and was a master of elicitation, gathering sensitive information from colleagues through casual conversations that never seemed like interrogations. His ability to build rapid rapport allowed him to operate undetected for over 20 years, recruiting sources and passing classified information while maintaining his cover as a loyal FBI counterintelligence officer. Anna Chapman, the Russian spy who operated in the United States as part of an illegal program, provides another compelling example of these techniques in action. Chapman's cover was as a young entrepreneur and socialite, and she used her attractiveness, charm, and exceptional social skills to build networks and gather intelligence. She was a master of finding common ground, researching targets extensively before approaching them so she could manufacture coincidental connections and shared interests. She used mirroring in social settings, adapting her energy level, speaking style, and interest to match whoever she was targeting. Her active listening skills made people feel valued and understood, encouraging them to share information about their work, their connections, and their access to sensitive information. Chapman's operation ultimately failed not because her trust-building techniques were ineffective, but because of technical surveillance that exposed her communications with Russian intelligence. Let us walk through a composite scenario showing all 5 techniques working together in a single 5-minute interaction. Imagine a Mossad operative needs to gather information about a European defense contractor. The operative, using a false identity as a technology consultant, approaches the target at an industry conference. Within the first 30 seconds, the operative begins mirroring the target's body language and speaking pace. The operative opens with finding common ground, mentioning they also studied engineering at a university in the same city as the target. This coincidence immediately creates warmth and connection. As the target talks about their work, the operative employs active listening with excellent eye contact, verbal affirmations, and paraphrasing key points to show understanding. 3 minutes in, the operative uses strategic vulnerability, sharing a manufactured story about a professional setback, which triggers reciprocity and causes the target to open up about their own career frustrations and current projects. Finally, the operative uses elicitation, making a deliberately incorrect statement about the target's company's security protocols. The target, wanting to correct the error and demonstrate their knowledge, reveals detailed information about access controls, project timelines, and key personnel. 5 minutes after the conversation began, the operative has built sufficient trust and rapport to suggest exchanging contact information and meeting for dinner, and the target eagerly agrees, never suspecting they've been expertly manipulated. While these trust-building techniques are taught to intelligence operatives for legitimate national security purposes, The same psychological methods are regularly employed by some of the most dangerous and destructive people in society for harmful ends. Con artists and fraudsters use identical techniques to separate victims from their money, employing mirroring to seem trustworthy, strategic vulnerability to create false intimacy, finding common ground to establish connection, and active listening to identify vulnerabilities they can exploit. The difference between a spy using these methods and a con artist is only the objective. The psychological manipulation is exactly the same. Cult leaders are masters of rapid trust building, using these techniques to recruit vulnerable individuals into organizations that will control and exploit them. They mirror potential recruits, validate their feelings of alienation or dissatisfaction, share strategic vulnerabilities that make them seem authentic and caring, and create powerful common ground around shared beliefs or experiences. Within hours or days, they can transform a skeptical stranger into a devoted follower willing to cut ties with family, donate all their possessions, and submit to absolute authority. Manipulative romantic partners use these same methods to establish control in relationships, love-bombing targets with mirroring, validation, and manufactured similarities that create intense feelings of connection, only to later reveal their true controlling or abusive nature once the victim is emotionally invested. The ethical implications of these techniques are profound and troubling, even when used by democratic governments for intelligence gathering. At their core, these methods involve psychological manipulation, the deliberate exploitation of human cognitive biases and emotional needs to make people behave in ways they wouldn't otherwise choose. When a spy uses strategic vulnerability to make a target share classified information, they're essentially lying about who they are and manufacturing false intimacy. To betray someone's trust, the target believes they're confiding in a friend or someone who genuinely cares about them, when in reality, they're being systematically exploited by a trained operative who will disappear once the intelligence is gathered. This raises serious questions about consent, autonomy, and human dignity. The targets of these techniques never consented to being manipulated. They were deceived into trusting someone who was fundamentally dishonest from the first moment of interaction. Even when the ultimate goal is protecting national security, which most people would agree is important, the means involve treating human beings as objects to be manipulated rather than autonomous individuals deserving of honesty and respect. There's also a significant psychological toll on the operatives themselves, who must constantly employ these techniques, living a life of perpetual deception, where every interaction is calculated and every friendship is false, creates immense psychological strain. Intelligence operatives often struggle with identity issues, difficulty forming genuine relationships, and moral injury from the cognitive dissonance of using manipulation techniques that violate their personal values. Many former spies report feeling profoundly isolated and struggling to transition back to normal life where authentic connection is possible, because they've spent years training themselves to view every interaction as an opportunity for manipulation and control. The question society must grapple with is whether the security benefits of these intelligence techniques justify the ethical costs, both to the targets who are manipulated and to the operatives, who must become professional deceivers. Now that you understand how these techniques work, the critical question becomes, how do you protect yourself and recognize when someone might be using these methods on you? The first and most important defense is awareness itself. Simply knowing that these techniques exist and understanding the specific behaviors involved makes you significantly less vulnerable to manipulation. When you know that rapid mirroring might indicate calculated rapport building rather than genuine connection, that strategic vulnerability might be a manipulation tactic rather than authentic openness, and that too many coincidental similarities might be manufactured rather than real. You can maintain appropriate skepticism even when your emotions are telling you to trust. The key is to recognize certain red flags that indicate an interaction might be manipulative rather than genuine. Patterns that suggest someone is employing trained techniques rather than naturally connecting with you. One major red flag is when a conversation feels too perfect, too smooth, or too easy, especially with someone you just met. Genuine human interactions have friction, minor disagreements, occasional awkward moments, and natural variations in energy and interest. If someone agrees with everything you say, validates every opinion you express, and never challenges or questions anything, that should raise suspicion rather than creating comfort. Real people have their own perspectives, preferences, and boundaries. Someone who seems to lack any independent viewpoint and simply mirrors everything back to you is likely employing manipulation techniques. Similarly, be cautious when someone shares deeply personal information very quickly, especially if it seems designed to trigger reciprocal sharing from you. Genuine vulnerability develops gradually, as trust is earned over time through consistent behavior. Strategic vulnerability front-loads intimacy artificially to create false connection and trigger the reciprocity principle. If someone you just met is telling you about their divorce, their childhood trauma, or their deepest fears within the first 10 minutes, they may be using calculated disclosure to manipulate you into sharing sensitive information in return. Pay attention to the pattern of coincidences and similarities. 1 or 2 genuine commonalities are normal and pleasant. 5, 10, or 15 remarkable similarities in background, interests, beliefs, and experiences with someone you just met should trigger skepticism rather than excitement. The statistical probability of the many genuine coincidences is extremely low, which means at least some of them are likely manufactured or exaggerated. Also notice if someone seems unusually interested in specific topics, especially related to your work, your access to information or resources, or sensitive aspects of your life. Genuine interest is broad and reciprocal, with both people sharing and learning about each other. Manipulative interest is targeted and one-directional, with the operative asking questions and steering conversation towards specific intelligence objectives while skillfully deflecting questions about themselves. Trust your instincts and emotional responses even when you can't articulate exactly what feels wrong. Your subconscious mind is remarkably good at detecting inconsistencies, micro-expressions that don't match stated emotions, and patterns that suggest deception. If something feels off, if you feel pressured to share when you normally wouldn't, if the pace of intimacy seems unnaturally fast, honor that feeling and maintain your boundaries. The best defense against manipulation is maintaining healthy skepticism, taking time to let trust develop naturally, through consistent behavior over weeks or months rather than minutes, and remembering that genuine connections don't require psychological tricks. They emerge organically when two people are authentically themselves. As we reach the end of this deep dive into the psychological techniques that spies use to build instant trust, it is important to recognize that these methods represent some of the most powerful tools of influence and persuasion ever developed. Trust building is neither good nor evil in itself. It's a skill that can be used for legitimate purposes like protecting national security, building genuine relationships, or improving communication. But it can also be weaponized for manipulation, exploitation, and harm. Intelligence agencies invest millions of dollars and countless hours training operatives in these techniques because they work with remarkable consistency across cultures, languages, and contexts. Understanding how these methods operate doesn't just satisfy intellectual curiosity about the spy world. It provides you with critical knowledge for navigating an increasingly complex social landscape where manipulation has become commonplace. These same techniques aren't just used by intelligence operatives working for governments. They are employed every single day by con artists running scams, salespeople pushing products you don't need, cold recruiters seeking vulnerable members, manipulative romantic partners establishing control, and anyone else who benefits from getting past your psychological defenses. The first step in protecting yourself is awareness, simply knowing that these techniques exist and recognizing that rapid trust, especially with strangers, should be viewed with healthy skepticism rather than accepted at face value. Genuine trust is something that develops organically over time through consistent behavior, shared experiences, and demonstrated reliability, not something that appears fully formed in a 5-minute conversation at a coffee shop. When you find yourself feeling unusually comfortable with someone you just met, experiencing a sense that you've known them forever, or sharing personal information much faster than you normally would, pause and ask yourself whether this feeling is organic or whether it might be the result of calculated techniques being deployed against you. Pay attention to whether the conversation feels slightly too perfect, whether the person agrees with everything you say without any pushback or differing opinions, whether they are mirroring your body language a bit too consistently, or whether they seem to share an improbable number of coincidental similarities with you. Trust your instincts when something feels off, even if you can't articulate exactly what's wrong, because your subconscious mind often detects manipulation before your conscious mind can identify the specific techniques being used. It's also worth remembering that while these techniques are powerful, they're not magic, and they don't work on everyone equally in every situation. People who are naturally skeptical, who have been burned by manipulation in the past, or who maintain strong personal boundaries are harder to influence using these methods. Building genuine awareness of your own psychological vulnerabilities, whether that's a need for validation, a desire to be liked, loneliness, or a tendency to trust quickly, helps you recognize when those vulnerabilities are being exploited. If you found this exploration of Spy Tradecraft fascinating and want to learn more about how intelligence agencies operate, make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the secret world of espionage. We've got incredible content coming up on other intelligence agencies, including the CIA, MI6, the FSB, and China's Ministry of State Security, plus more videos breaking down the specific techniques, technologies, and tactics that spies use in the field. Drop a comment below telling us which aspect of Spy Tradecraft you want us to cover next, whether it's surveillance detection, creating cover identities, dead drops and covert communication, or the psychology of betrayal and recruitment. Don't forget to like this video to help us reach more people who are fascinated by the hidden world of intelligence operations. Until next time, stay aware, stay curious, and remember that in a world where manipulation has become a science, knowledge is your best defense. Trust wisely, question often, and never forget that the most dangerous manipulations are the ones you never see coming.